And our next speaker is Lisa Messeri. Lisa is an anthropologist of science and technology. She'll explain better in her talk. But welcome, I want to welcome Lisa, and thank you for being here today, and also your involvement in the festival, because Lisa will also be participating in the panel discussion in the afternoon or evening, depending on your time zone. And also she has an essay that's forming part of the exhibition, and I'm encouraging you to go in there and read it. It's really great. So Lisa is currently a professor of sociocultural anthropology at Yale University, and she got her PhD from MIT in history and anthropology and science, technology and society. And also she has an SB from MIT as well in aerospace engineering. And her research focuses on how scientists transform our understanding of what it means to be in the world, and in particular, the role of place, like the surroundings, and placemaking in scientific work. And also how these scientific practices and imaginations influence how the rest of the humans see the world, both physical and mentally, if you would say. And part of Lisa's work and research is focused on space science and exoplanets, but more recently she's also been interested in virtual reality, researchers and innovators, which in a way is a sort of another alien place. And her talk today is going to bring the different elements of this festival a bit together. So we have the scientists and the artists and what they do in between, but whenever they interpret what surrounds us is always through the very human gaze. So I'm going to hand it over to Lisa now, but just remind our audience that Lisa will be taking questions after the talk. Please feel free to leave your questions in the gallery chat box, which our team will be monitoring, or through Zoom as well. Yeah, over to Lisa now.
Thanks so much. Thanks for that beautiful introduction, and also just thanks to the organizers for creating such a fantastic experience today. I spent some time in the gallery earlier and really loved seeing all the artwork, and I just heard Tayana's fascinating research talk, so I'm really excited for everything else that's going to unfold today. For now, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so yeah, my talk today is titled Cosmic Connection: Humanity in the Age of Exoplanets. And first I feel it necessary to give a little bit of background on what exactly is anthropology of science, or anthropology of science and technology. As many of you might be encountering this discipline for the first time. So effectively, what I and my colleagues do is we're interested in studying both the culture of science and technology, so kind of those ways in which culture permeates a laboratory setting, and the ways that scientists have of talking with each other or talking to broader publics. But also we're interested in how science and technology shapes culture. So what happens in the laboratory actually translates or shapes how we imagine our experiences in the world. As was introduced, I'm going to be drawing a little bit from both two of my main research projects. So my first project, which culminated in the book Placing Outer Space, which was published in 2016, was an anthropological study of planetary scientists. Now, anthropologists' primary method is ethnography, which is kind of another way of saying hanging out with people and getting to know communities. So in this first project, I hung out with a lot of different communities of planetary scientists, both those who were studying exoplanets, the theme of today's event, as well as what I'll be talking about, but also Mars scientists. And what I was really interested in was, how do these scientists transform globs of rock, dust, metal, ice, gas into worlds, into places? I was really fascinated with how this kind of planetary placemaking became central to scientific work, not only as a way of talking to a public by saying, look at these cool worlds we're finding, but this need to think about planets as places and worlds was also central to kind of to the work of the profession. So my current research kind of goes to a different mode of world making, and that's the world making practices of virtual reality innovators. And for this project and for this research, I've been spending time with VR innovators in Los Angeles, kind of understanding what the imagination of virtual reality is from kind of this place of fantasy that is LA. So these seem like very different projects, but both planetary scientists and virtual reality is about the creation or study of other worlds. Both of these disciplines are about how science and technology makes other worlds and what it might mean for humanity more broadly to inhabit, even if only imaginatively, these other worlds. So inspired by the virtual setting of this exoplanet event, I'm using this short talk to trace a commonality between these two projects, and we'll do so by posing the following question. What does exoplanet astronomy and virtual reality tell us about what it means to be human? So at first blush, the answer to this question might be something about alienation or kind of disconnection. After all, both of these fields are about other worlds, kind of not about our own world, but about other worlds. And also they take place in the realm of the infinite, whether this is outer space or cyberspace. But I'm going to show how both exoplanet astronomy and VR promoters claim that these infinite other worlds, rather than leading to some kind of isolation or a depletion of our humanity, actually lead to more connection that in fact intensifies our humanity. So I'm going to begin with exoplanets, and then we'll kind of come back at the end to connect back to the virtual. So part of my research with exoplanet astronomers, which took place around 2009 to 2011, this was really when the discipline was really finding its steam and creating a lot of energy. In the time I did my fieldwork, there went from being a couple hundred exoplanets known to have been documented to now there are several thousand. But of all of these many exoplanets, the community then and to some extent now was oriented around this question of finding an Earth-like exoplanet. This was the holy grail of exoplanet astronomy, not only to find any planet around another star, but to find a planet that is as similar to Earth as possible around another star. So this would be a planet that was about the same size as Earth and about the same composition of Earth. And if it was orbiting at just the right distance from its host star, then maybe this was a planet that could sustain liquid water on its surface. And this was exciting because if that sustaining of liquid water might mean that maybe this was a planet that could host life. So in 2009, right kind of in the middle of my ethnographic fieldwork, NASA launched the Kepler Space Telescope with its mission of finding this holy grail, of finding this Earth-like exoplanet. Celebrating this launch, science writer Dennis Overby wrote in the New York Times that, quote, "Someday it might be said that this was the beginning of the end of cosmic loneliness." Whoa, I remember reading that editorial and just it kind of like blowing my mind. And I was already kind of well into my study of exoplanet astronomers, but there was something still about this framing that I just found so fascinating, because it kind of imagined that the mere promise of a planet like our own could speak to something as profound as human loneliness, or as profoundly human as loneliness. And I just really was fascinated by this kind of way of thinking about the significance of exoplanet astronomy. So as I began thinking about how could the search for exoplanets be thought of as the end to cosmic loneliness, I began considering the words and gestures of astronomers and astronauts in order to understand how they describe their relationship with the cosmos. So to highlight what is different about the relationship between humanity and the cosmos in the age of exoplanets, I compare what I call a gesture of cosmic connection, often evoked by exoplanet astronomers, with one that is described by Apollo astronauts. So Apollo, as you might recall, was the first and the last set of missions to send humans beyond Earth's orbit and ultimately to the moon. Throughout these missions, astronauts talked about a kind of image of holding up their thumb and blotting out the Earth. This is their gesture of cosmic connection. And here is a quote from astronaut Jim Lovell describing this gesture in a 2010 documentary. He says, "I could put up my thumb and hide the Earth completely. Then it dawned on me how completely insignificant we are. Everything I had ever known, my family, my country, my world, was behind my thumb." And here's Neil Armstrong, again, I'm quoting him, offering a similar sentiment. He said, quote, "It suddenly struck me that that tiny pea, pretty and blue, was the Earth. I put up my thumb and shut one eye, and my thumb blotted out the planet Earth. I didn't feel like a giant. I felt very, very small." So if you'll recall, during the Apollo missions from 1968 to 1972, it was an incredibly turbulent time on Earth, both in the world and in the United States. There was the never-ending Vietnam War. It was kind of the real kind of turning point of the civil rights movement. And there was a burgeoning awareness of the environmental catastrophe that our planet was potentially hurtling toward. So when the astronauts returned to Earth, they kind of began to think about the significance of their journey to the moon as about kind of reminding everyone about the preciousness of our own planet and how, we have to perhaps do a little bit more work to protect it and to protect each other on this planet. So this Apollo era gesture is actually, of holding up the thumb, is actually one of disconnection and insignificance. It was not about the beauty of the infinite cosmos, but rather, as the politics of the moment required, it was about reconnecting with Earth and acknowledging Earth's fragility and humanity's role as Earth's stewards. So let's compare this gesture and its attending imagination with the one that I encountered throughout my fieldwork with exoplanet astronomers. Rather than a gesture of a thumb blotting out the Earth, this is a gesture of an index finger pointing to another Earth. This is their gesture of cosmic connection. So here's a quote from exoplanet astronomer Natalie Batalha. "When you look up in the sky, what do you feel? There's a profound sense of loneliness, I think, that the universe is so big and I'm so small. Imagine in the near-term future, your grandchild or your great-grandchild and his mother can point to a star and say, that star right there has a planet just like Earth and it harbors life. That's a different perspective." So in this quote, which is taken from an interview that Batalha did for the NPR show On Being, she kind of first presents the current cosmic state, which is one of loneliness. And then she contrasts it to a cosmic state in which we've made particular exoplanet discoveries. And she kind of offers that as the different perspective, or to summarize Overby, or to quote him again, that new perspective, that different perspective would be the end of cosmic loneliness. So this kind of myth that I present here with the pointing and even the mother with their child outside, this myth was repeated again and again throughout my fieldwork and still kind of travels through the community today. I heard it, of course, on radio interviews. I read it in white papers. I heard it given by astronomers in talks to each other at conferences. This is a myth that circulates and provides meaning for scientists to make sense of their own work, but also, of course, to convey why their work is important to a broader public. The myth offers that the discovery of an Earth-like exoplanet is meaningful because it will facilitate finally knowing, quote, our place in the universe. We will better understand our humanity because we will better know the cosmos. So what I find really beautiful about this gesture is that it's not about definitive knowledge. It's not about making contact with another intelligence, but rather it suggests that connection can be forged simply by knowing that there is the potential for life, the potential for liveliness. So my book concludes by making the point that as much as exoplanet astronomy is about finding ever more exoplanets and knowing them in ever greater detail, that it's this desire to feel connected, especially in the face of the cosmic expanse, that makes this science meaningful. When I was finishing up this research, I didn't actually at the time think of this as in any way altering our humanity to be more human. Rather, this language of being more human is something that I observed and came across in the virtual reality community. And so I'm juxtaposing very briefly these cases as a provocation. So here's a quote from a filmmaker turned VR entrepreneur, Chris Milk, and he says, "Through this machine, being virtual reality, we become more compassionate, we become more empathetic, and we become more connected. And ultimately, we become more human." So Milk's most famous documentary, VR documentary, was about a child in one of the Syrian refugee camps. And his claim, and I'm not here kind of defending this claim, but I'm presenting it, is that this kind of immersive VR experience was something that would bring you into a space that you otherwise, as a white Western viewer, wouldn't have access to. And you'll have a connection to another human in a more profound way. Now, this is a very different kind of VR experience than, say, a fantasy game. And it's precisely that, that difference that allows someone like Milk to claim that VR is a machine that makes us more human. So I offer this example because, as with exoplanet astronomy, something that at first blush might seem naturally disorienting or disconnecting is actually presented by scientists and innovators as a mode of connection and enriching our humanity. And these imaginations of virtual and cosmic connection are needed today more than ever. In the time of COVID, there's this feeling of intense loneliness for many, and we need to be able to feel connected even though we are separated at great distances. And as I was preparing this talk, I noted that almost exactly a year to this day was the first time that my family convened on Zoom for what would become a practically daily, I tune in weekly, Zoom conversation between the different members of my family. We're not spread all over the world. We're actually within the tri-state area, but this still has been the main way that we've been able to interact and connect with each other during the pandemic. But it's also precisely because of this COVID experience, this way in which all of our connection has been mediated through the virtual worlds, including today's event, I think we're all increasingly aware of how these virtual connections are, to some extent, insufficient. Now, I can only speak for myself, but I find myself not less human, but finding it increasingly hard to recall that particular kind of humanity that comes from the fellow feeling of being together, not only virtually or cosmically, but as family, friends, and community. So this talk has drawn inspiration from how astronomers and VR innovators might answer this question. But as an anthropologist, for me, there's just no easy answer to the question of what it means to be human. And our present pandemic ways of being kind of show this complexity ever more clearly. So what I find fascinating in all of this is how we nonetheless look to outer space or look to virtual reality to feel more connected or less alone. We, of course, need to keep being inspired by outer space and cyberspace. But I personally am also looking forward to reconnecting with the very local, terrestrial, and physical ways that we tap into our own and each other's humanity. So thank you, and I look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you, Lisa. That was really beautiful. The layers of this existential deepness of just a gesture and the end of comic loneliness, but that maybe you would think that makes someone give them some sort of cosmic anxiety. I don't know, that was really inspiring. And I was just have the questions of how connected are we, what are we all feeling today? And yes, we'll open the questions, please. Questions for Lisa, encouraging everyone. And we already had one. So Jose was asking, thank you, it's ultra interesting, Lisa. And after conversations with friends, I feel like most of humans believe that there is life at other similar planets. And following your chat, I can envision the influence of science discoveries to strengthen that thinking. But in your opinion, is there any connection to the fact that before science existed as it is today, former civilizations like the Sumerians had the belief that our planet was visited by superior beings coming from outer space?
Yeah, I mean, what I love about that question is it reminds us how very cultural scientific ideas are. So what we today think of as, you know, Western scientific, Western science, and kind of let me start again. Western science is premised on a disconnection between, you know, us on Earth and the broader cosmos, right? This kind of, in order to know the universe, we actually first have to be able to imagine ourselves as outside of the universe, as disconnected from the universe. That's the classic divide between subjectivity and objectivity. For science to exist, you first have to have had that philosophical insight to make that decision. I promise this is getting back to ancient aliens. So once we have that, so that's very much how kind of today's conversations about extraterrestrial life are premised on. But it's incredible. But to understand older non-Western cosmologies, we have to also remind ourselves that there wasn't this premised disconnection between our planet and our world and other worlds, that there are other cosmologies for which Earth is kind of already in space, is already, you know, in contact with different beings who don't necessarily live on Earth. So asking the question about ancient aliens is actually really challenging because it presupposes Western scientific and modern categories into a site for which that philosophically and cosmologically actually doesn't actually make a tremendous amount of sense. So I guess another way of answering that is that if we really want to like kind of think about these different realms together, we have to be ready to decenter ourselves and our kind of scientific ontologies to really wrestle with these other ontologies and what they tell us about the world.
There's a few more questions coming, all related to that.
Oh gosh.
A little bit, and also like in like the myth formation as well, how they get implanted. But another question from the audience is like, if there should be something comforting to the idea of extraterrestrials, why do so many fear coming into contact with them? Is there any sense of facing a new reality of how fragile human life is by doing so? What's your opinion as an anthropologist?
As an anthropologist.
Yeah.
Well, so we are the fear of aliens. That's again an incredibly not only modern concept, but I would say even a recent concept. So I teach a class called the Anthropology of Outer Space. Because I actually don't research aliens, and exoplanet astronomers are always incredibly clear to say we are not we're not astrobiologists, we're not SETI. However, when I teach this class on anthropology of outer space, I do have to teach about aliens. And the recent history of extraterrestrial contact in the United States, the first reported alien sighting, alien contact in the US is in the 1950s. And it's not a gray, scary alien. It's actually a beautiful alien from Venus with long flowing blonde hair who came to warn citizens of the Earth about the detriment of nuclear war. So the first myth of alien contact in kind of the popular consciousness was one of concern and like kind of friendliness and reaching out. And it wasn't until kind of a different kind of conspiracy thinking emerged in the mid 20th century, in like the 1960s and 70s in US popular culture, did you get this image of kind of the scary and intrusive alien. So that's kind of a historical answer to that question.
Yeah, I heard like Hollywood had a bit of also like a role played in the scary alien.
Yeah, the
And
X-Files.
also, yeah, I was personally reading a little bit about it and how the shape of the spacecraft has changed, even like from the 18. If you go back to like old books, like how the shapes have changed from how like the humans interpret how things look, and it's because like the references. You see, they putting the reference, or they making the spacecraft, the alien spacecraft, in reference to what they know. I don't know if we have more time for another question. Let me see. Okay, there's another one here. It's like, should we definitely discover life on other planets? Do you think that will satisfy our cosmic loneliness or exacerbate it? Even if there is life, we can't reach them to cosmic distances. So might that make us feel even more lonely? And I'm adding this on that, how it relates to the VR thing as well.
Yeah. Uh, ap- that is such a that question is in self kind of the answer, right? It's a beautiful comment, right? And it's something that really enchanted me with exoplanet astronomy was this belief of kind of just knowing, answering this question of cosmic loneliness. But to me, I imagine, and I think I would guess exoplanet astronomers would agree with me, that it's a bit of a Xenos paradox, meaning that you're only ever going to get halfway there, and since there are always infinite halves, you can never fully get there. So I think there is a deep human desire to know our place in the universe. This goes back, I mean, astronomers are always referencing the Greeks and kind of their own questioning of our place in the universe. And I think that the questioner is absolutely correct that we just won't ever get there. There will always be a different way for us to feel insignificant in the face of what is the immense, vast, infinite outer space. And I think, that's likewise with VR. VR is kind of promising, oh, we can like help you get closer. We can help you, make you more human. But I think that it's always a deferred promise. But we need these deferred promises because it inspires not only ourselves as scientists and thinkers, but also kind of the broader communities that we're, hoping to form alliances with. So I suppose, and as you mentioned at the beginning, I began as an engineer and now I'm an anthropologist. And one of the big differences that I find in myself in shifting from kind of being being an engineer to being a social scientist is being okay with never arriving there, with kind of allowing the journey, so to speak, to be where meaning is created, and also to allow all the different kind of changes that occur as more that to allow my questions to change and to recognize that even if I wasn't able to answer my original questions, being able to pose new questions I hadn't yet been able to is kind of the essence of the work that I do.
So I think this is a very beautiful way of finishing your presentation and your talk discussion. Thank you so much. It was really lovely to have you. And then I'm going to leave the audience with David again for the concert with Multiverse and Matt Russo. Don't leave, stay tuned, and thank you again. Thank you, Lisa, too.